In 1849, a British archaeologist named Austen Henry Layard pulled a small clay tablet out of the ruins of ancient Nineveh. It was no bigger than the palm of his hand, covered in cuneiform script that had been buried for nearly 4,000 years. He shipped it to London along with thousands of other artifacts from the library of King Ashurbanipal. And for decades, that little tablet sat in a wooden crate at the British Museum, waiting for someone to read it. When scholars finally translated the cuneiform in the late 1800s, something strange happened. The tablet was quietly removed from public display. It was given a new catalog number. And according to several researchers who tried to view it in the 20th century, it became one of the most difficult artifacts in the entire collection to access. What did the tablet say? It described a place at the very bottom of the deepest waters on Earth, a place the ancient Sumerians called the Abzu, which in their language meant the dwelling of those who came down from the sky. And according to the cuneiform text, this place was not empty. It was never abandoned. The beings who built it were still there. Now jump forward to January 23, 1960. Two men climbed into a deep sea vessel called the Trieste and descended almost 7 miles straight down into a part of the Pacific Ocean called the Mariana Trench. It took them nearly 5 hours to reach the bottom. They sat there in the dark in a steel sphere the size of a small kitchen, looking out through a single tiny window. And what they reported seeing on the seafloor of the deepest place on Earth was so unusual that the United States Navy classified portions of their findings for over 50 years. What did Jacques Picard and Don Walsh actually see down there? And why does it line up almost exactly with what a clay tablet from 4,000 years ago said would be waiting for them? Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button if you want more videos that dig into the stories, mainstream history quietly buried. What you're about to hear was never in your textbooks. And once you understand what these Sumerian tablets actually describe, you will never look at the deep ocean the same way again. To understand what this tablet really means, you need to understand who the Sumerians were and why their records are so strange. The Sumerians lived in southern Mesopotamia, in what is now southern Iraq, starting around 4000 BC. They invented writing. They invented the wheel. They built the first cities. They created mathematics, astronomy, codes of law, and irrigation systems that are still studied today. And they did all of this in a span of just a few hundred years, seemingly out of nowhere, in a region where the people before them had been simple herders and farmers. Mainstream historians say the Sumerians were just clever. They say civilization had to start somewhere, and Mesopotamia happened to be the place. But when you actually read what the Sumerians wrote about themselves, they tell a very different story. They said their knowledge came from teachers who arrived from somewhere else, teachers who were not human. These teachers were called the Anunnaki. The word itself, broken down, means those who came down from above to below. In Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki are described as tall beings with long beards and elongated heads who wore strange clothing and carried devices the Sumerians could not understand. They came to Earth, the tablets say, for a specific reason. They needed something, and they built bases in 3 locations to extract what they needed. The first base was in the mountains. The Sumerians called it the Eden, and it sat in a region we now recognize as the southern Iraqi plains and the Persian Gulf Coast. The second base was in the air. The tablets describe a network of high places, mountain peaks where the Anunnaki landed their vehicles. The third base, and this is the one that gets buried in every mainstream translation, was below the water, below the surface of the deepest oceans. The Sumerians called this place the Abzu. In the standard academic translations, the Abzu is usually described as a kind of cosmic underground freshwater ocean. Scholars will tell you it is a mythological concept, an ancient Sumerian metaphor for the source of life. They translate it as the watery deep or the primordial sea. They make it sound poetic, symbolic, religious. But that is not what the cuneiform actually says when you read it without the mythological filter. The tablets describe the Abzu with specific physical features. They give it a location. They named the being who ruled it a figure called Enki, who in the text is described as a master of waters and a builder of cities. The tablets describe Enki traveling down into the Abzu inside what the Sumerians called a magar boat, a vessel that could move through water at great depths. They describe the Abzu as having gates, walls, chambers, gardens, and workshops. They describe creatures living there that were not human and not animal in any normal sense. And then there is the Nineveh tablet, the one Layard found in 1849. Researchers who have studied photographs of this tablet and partial translations describe a text that gives coordinates. Not modern coordinates, of course. The Sumerians did not have latitude and longitude, but they had something better for their purposes. They had stellar references. They described the location of the Abzu by which constellations sat directly overhead at specific times of year, and by which mountain ranges were aligned with the surface above it. When researchers in the 20th century took these stellar references and ran them through reverse calculation software, accounting for the precession of the equinoxes over 4,000 years, the location that came back was startling. The tablet was describing a point in the Pacific Ocean, a point near the equator, a point that, when matched against modern bathymetric maps of the seafloor, sits directly above the deepest section of a feature that would not be discovered by modern science for another 4,000 years. The Mariana Trench. How is that possible? The Mariana Trench is the deepest known location on Earth. Its lowest point, called the Challenger Deep, sits more than 36,000 feet below sea level. That is almost 7 miles straight down. The pressure at the bottom is over 1,000 times the pressure at the surface. It is so dark down there that no sunlight has ever reached the floor, not in the entire 4.5 billion year history of the planet. The water temperature is just above freezing. The seafloor itself is covered in a fine sediment that, in some areas, is over 1,000 feet deep. This is a place that modern science only confirmed existed in the 1870s, when the British survey ship HMS Challenger took the first sounding measurements that hinted at how deep the Pacific really was. The actual depth of the Mariana Trench was not measured accurately until the 1950s. The first human descent to the bottom did not happen until 1960, and yet a clay tablet written 4,000 years ago in a desert civilization that had no boats capable of crossing an ocean somehow described the location of the deepest spot on the planet with enough accuracy that the coordinates can still be reverse engineered today. Either the Sumerians were guessing and they got astronomically lucky, or someone told them. Someone who had been there. Someone who knew exactly where it was because they had built something there. Let us talk about what actually happened on January 23, 1960. The Trieste was a bathyscaphe, a kind of deep diving submarine designed by a Swiss engineer named Auguste Piccard. The vessel was bought by the United States Navy, who wanted to use it for a project they called Project Nekton. The goal was simple: send 2 men to the bottom of the Challenger Deep, the deepest point on Earth, and see if it could be done. They were the first humans in history to touch the deepest point on Earth. The official report says they spent 20 minutes on the bottom. They reported seeing a flatfish on the seafloor, which surprised marine biologists because nobody thought a vertebrate could survive at that pressure. But here is what the official story leaves out. Don Walsh, who lived until 2023, gave several interviews late in his life where he hinted at things he and Piccard had observed but were instructed not to discuss publicly. He talked about lights that did not behave like bioluminescence, lights that appeared in patterns then disappeared. He talked about sounds that came through the hull of the sphere, sounds that the support ship on the surface also picked up on their hydrophones, sounds that the Navy classified and never released. Jacques Piccard, before he died in 2008, was more direct. In a documentary interview filmed in 1995, Piccard described seeing what he called structures on the seafloor. He used that word specifically, structures. He said they were not natural rock formations. He said they had angles, straight lines, and what appeared to be openings. He said he did not know what they were, but he was certain they were not made by any geological process he understood. And then he said something that, when you connect it to the Sumerian tablets, makes the hair on your arm stand up. He said the structures appeared to be lit from within. Now, the official scientific community has spent the last 60 years dismissing these accounts. They say Walsh and Picard were exhausted. They say the acrylic window of the Trieste was small and the lighting was poor. They say what the men saw was almost certainly mineral deposits or sediment formations that resembled artificial shapes by accident. They call it pareidolia, the human brain's tendency to see patterns in random shapes. Maybe? But here is the problem with that explanation. In the years since the Trieste dive, the Mariana Trench has been visited again, multiple times, by submersibles equipped with high-definition cameras, lighting systems, and scientific instruments that did not exist in 1960. And every single one of those expeditions has come back with footage that the operating organizations have either kept private, edited heavily, or refused to release. In 2012, the filmmaker James Cameron descended alone to the Challenger Deep in a vessel he had built specifically for the trip. He spent over 3 hours on the bottom. He took extensive video. When he returned to the surface, he gave a press conference where he described the seafloor as desolate, lunar, and lifeless. He said he saw almost nothing of interest. But here is the thing. The video Cameron took on that dive was supposed to be released as a National Geographic documentary. Once is an anomaly, twice is a coincidence. But when every single deep ocean expedition to the Mariana Trench in the last 60 years has come back with either suppressed footage, withdrawn data, or carefully managed press releases, something is going on. So what does the Sumerian tablet actually say is down there? The translation of the Nineveh tablet, pieced together from multiple researchers including Zechariah Sitchin in the 1970s, and several independent Sumerologists since, describes the Abzu as a constructed facility. The word used in the cuneiform translates roughly as a built place or a place of making. The tablet describes the Abzu as having levels like floors in a building. It describes machinery, though the word the Sumerians used would more accurately translate as devices that work without being touched. It describes a population of beings the Sumerians did not have words to fully describe, but who were neither fully Anunnaki nor fully human. The tablet says the Abzu was a workshop, a place where Enki and his followers conducted experiments on living creatures, including humans. The tablet specifically says that the first humans, the very first Homo sapiens, were created in the Abzu. They were made there by Enki and his sister Ninhursag, using the genetic material of an older species combined with something the tablet calls the essence of the Anunnaki. If that sounds like science fiction, you should know that this is not a fringe interpretation. This is what the Sumerian creation tablets actually say, when translated literally, and without the mythological softening that academic translators usually apply. The Sumerians did not believe humans were created by a divine miracle. They believed humans were engineered in a laboratory at the bottom of the deepest ocean on Earth. And here is where it gets stranger. The tablet describes what happened when the work was finished. The Anunnaki, according to the text, eventually left the surface of the Earth. They had a falling out, a conflict that the tablets describe as a war that nearly destroyed the planet. After the war, most of the Anunnaki departed, but not all of them. Some stayed, and the tablet is specific about where they stayed. They retreated to the Abzu, they sealed the gates, they went deeper, and they have been down there, the tablet says, ever since. Now think about what we know about the Mariana Trench. We know almost nothing about it. We have explored less than 5% of the entire deep ocean. The Mariana Trench is so deep, so cold, and so dark that conventional submarines cannot survive there for extended periods. The pressure crushes equipment, electronics fail, communications break down. We have spent more time studying the surface of Mars than we have spent at the bottom of our own ocean. If a civilization wanted to hide on Earth, somewhere they could not be reached by any current human technology, somewhere they could maintain themselves indefinitely without interference, there is exactly one place on the planet that would work. and it is the place the Sumerians described 4,000 years ago as the dwelling that was never abandoned. Let us talk about the strangest piece of all of this: the reports of activity. For decades, the United States Navy has tracked unidentified submerged objects, or USOs, in the Pacific Ocean. These are underwater versions of UFOs, objects that appear on sonar, move at impossible speeds, change direction in ways that no human submarine can match, and originate from depths that no human vessel can reach. The Navy has acknowledged these objects exist. Multiple sailors and submarine officers have testified to their existence under oath in congressional hearings. A disproportionate number of these USO sightings cluster in one region of the Pacific, the region around the Mariana Trench. In 1987, the crew of the USS Stein, a frigate, reported damage to their sonar dome after a deep ocean encounter. When the ship was put into dry dock, the rubber coating of the sonar dome was found to have hundreds of cuts in it. The cuts were described by Navy investigators as resembling teeth marks, but the size and pattern of the marks did not match any known marine creature. The teeth, if that is what they were, would have belonged to an animal larger than any documented species in the ocean. In 1997, a hydrophone array operated by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration picked up a sound from the Pacific Ocean that became known as the bloop. The bloop was louder than the loudest sound ever recorded from a marine animal. It was picked up by multiple hydrophone stations thousands of miles apart. Scientists initially said it sounded biological. Then they changed their position and said it was probably an iceberg cracking. But independent acoustic analysts who studied the original recording argued that the structure of the sound did not match any natural geological process. The bloop, they said, sounded mechanical, like a machine of enormous size starting up. The bloop was triangulated to a location in the South Pacific, not exactly at the Mariana Trench, but in a part of the ocean that connects to it through deep underwater trench systems, the kind of connections that the Sumerian tablets suggest were used by the Anunnaki to move between their underwater bases. And in 2021, a former Navy submarine officer, in testimony before a congressional committee, described an incident in the Western Pacific in which a U.S. attack submarine encountered an object that descended past it at a depth of over 20,000 feet. The object was moving downward at a speed that the officer said was over 400 miles per hour. At that depth, in water that should crush anything moving that fast. The object continued descending past their sonar range and disappeared into the trench below. What was it? Nobody officially knows, or more accurately, nobody is saying. There is another piece to this puzzle that almost never makes it into mainstream discussion. In 1994, a research team operating in the Western Pacific deployed a network of seismic sensors to study earthquake activity along the trench. The sensors recorded normal tectonic readings for several months. Then, over a period of about 3 weeks, they recorded something that none of the researchers could explain: a series of low-frequency pulses coming from a single point near the bottom of the trench, repeating at regular intervals. The pulses were not seismic. They did not match any known underwater volcanic activity. They were too regular to be random, and when the team tried to analyze the pattern, they realized the pulses were structured. They appeared to follow a mathematical sequence, not the kind of sequence that nature produces, the kind of sequence that a sending device produces. The data was submitted to a journal. The paper was withdrawn before publication. The team leader was reassigned. The sensor array was decommissioned and removed from the area. None of the original recordings have been publicly released in the 3 decades since. The few researchers who tried to follow up on the story discovered that copies of the data had been quietly classified by a defense agency, and any further inquiries were met with denials that the recordings had ever existed at all. In 2016, an oceanographer attending a closed conference on deep-sea acoustics in Norway reportedly played a brief audio file for a small group of colleagues. According to several attendees who later spoke about it anonymously, the audio was a section of the 1994 recording. The colleagues described it as sounding like a heartbeat, a slow, deep, mechanical heartbeat, coming from a point 7 miles below the surface, in the deepest place on Earth. The Sumerian tablets describe the Abzu as a living facility, a place that breathed, a place where the workshops never stopped running. They describe the sound of the Abzu in their poetic language as the heart of the deep waters. The pattern keeps repeating. Every time modern science gets close to whatever is down there, the data goes missing, the researchers go quiet, and the public is told that the deepest place on Earth is just rocks and sediment. The pattern across all of this is consistent. A 4,000-year-old tablet says a non-human civilization built a base at the deepest point in the ocean and never left. Modern deep-sea expeditions report seeing structures and lights that match the tablet's description. Every expedition has its footage suppressed or its data withdrawn. The U.S. Navy tracks objects in the same region that behave in ways that defy human technology. And the deepest point on Earth remains, despite 60 years of trying, the least explored region of our planet. You can dismiss any one of these things. You can explain away a single anomaly. But when you put them all together, when you stack the ancient text on top of the modern observations, on top of the military data, on top of the suppressed footage, you start to see a picture that mainstream science does not want anyone to look at too closely. There is a reason the Mariana Trench is not explored more thoroughly. There is a reason that, despite having the technology to map it in detail, we have not done so. There is a reason that the few people who have gone down there come back saying very little, and what they do say gets carefully managed by their sponsors. The Sumerians knew. They were told. By beings who had been there, who built it, and who, according to their tablets, never left. The question is not whether the ancient texts are accurate. The question is what the modern world is going to do when, eventually, the truth comes up from those depths. Because the tablet says something else, something that the academic translators usually skip over entirely. It says that the Anunnaki who remained in the Abzu were not just hiding. They were waiting for the day when humanity reached a certain level of development, a level at which we would either be ready to make contact, or, according to the text, a level at which we would have to be dealt with. What does that mean? What were they waiting for? And how close are we right now to whatever threshold the ancient Sumerians said would trigger their return? Those are the questions we are not supposed to ask. Those are the questions that get researchers blacklisted from academic journals. Those are the questions that get documentaries pulled from streaming services. Those are the questions that, when you start digging into them too publicly, get you a quiet visit from someone who suggests you find a different topic to work on. But the tablet is real. The Trieste descent is real. The USO sightings are real. The bloop is real. The suppressed footage from modern expeditions is real. The pattern is real. Somewhere at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, 7 miles down in cold and total darkness, there is something the ancient Sumerians described in detail 4,000 years ago. Something that has been there longer than civilization itself. Something that every time we get close to it, we somehow lose the footage, lose the data, or are told politely not to ask any more questions. The deepest place on Earth is not empty. The ancient world knew. The modern world is starting to figure it out. And the only people who will keep the truth hidden forever are the ones who have decided that you are not ready to hear it. If you found this video as unsettling as the people who first translated that tablet did, hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel for more videos about the ancient knowledge that was buried, suppressed, or quietly removed from the record. There is a video appearing on screen right now about the underground cities in Turkey that may have been built by the same civilization the Sumerians described. Watch it next. The story is bigger than you think, and the deeper you dig, the more clearly you can see that the history we were taught is not the history that actually happened. The Abzu is still down there, and whatever is in it is still waiting.